Hello again, everyone. This is a midterm review for Chapter 1, Part 2. We will be going over public speaking versus conversational speaking, the similarities and the differences, nervousness and tips that your book gives for nervousness, as well as the key terms for the chapter. So the first password for this video is Nox, as in the opposite of Lumos. And without further ado, the similarities between public speaking and conversational speaking. The first similarity between the two is you have to have organized, logical thoughts. Logically organize your thoughts. So if you're talking with your friends and you start talking about the weather, then your grocery list, then the Cubs game, then, I don't know, a car accident you saw, or a cute top you saw in the mall, there isn't a logical train of thought between all of those topics, and your friends are going to be like, wait, we were just talking about the weather, now we're talking about a car accident? What? The same thing happens when you're giving a public speech of any kind. So you want to make sure that you've thought your speech through, all of your topics flow seamlessly, and they make sense with one another, etc. The second way in which public speaking and conversational speaking are similar is you can tailor the message to your audience. I'm sure you know your friend's preference of conversational topic. It's probably different to that of your audience's preference, but you can always do a pre-speech survey. So what that would entail is you would have to come up with a survey to give to your classmates before you start researching to see what they would be interested in hearing about. You can also, later in life, maybe become a famous public speaker. You can advertise what you're speaking about. Motivational speakers do this all the time. They advertise what their master classes will be about, and people come to see those because it's been tailored for people that want to hear that, right? The third similarity between public and conversational speaking is you want to tell a story for maximum impact. Just like when you're talking to your friends, they won't necessarily follow a story if it's too long, if there's too many details that are tangents within themselves, or if the story just doesn't relate to the topic you guys were already talking about. The same thing happens in a speech. If you go off on a tangent in a speech that has nothing to do with your speech topic, people are going to be confused. Rightfully so. And the fourth and last similarity between public and conversational speaking is adapting to listener feedback. Just like with your friends, if you notice that they're kind of zoning out or they no longer are interested in what you're saying, you're going to either stop talking or change the subject. Or maybe they're confused about something and you'll backtrack and explain it further. You can take a visual survey of the classroom and see if people are still listening, and maybe if they're not and they've kind of zoned out, you can get louder and surprise them somehow, or state a shocking fact that no one would have known, and then they're like, wait, did I hear that right? Or if there's a lot of confused looks, you can backtrack and reiterate what you've said in a different way to make sure that you've communicated what you need to properly. Moving on to the differences between public speaking. Before I do, the second password of this video is Orion, as in Orion's belt. So the differences between public and conversational speaking, there are 3 of them. They can be found on page 8 of your textbook. The first one is that public speaking is much more structured than conversational speaking. So usually there is a time limit, there might be a rubric, etc. These are things that kind of structure the way public speaking goes. Also, public speaking requires more of a formal language, so you're not going to use the lingo you would with your friends. So you're not going to be saying, oh my gosh, or did you hear, or etc. Like, and, etc., etc. Okay, so these are things you use when you're talking to your friends, not when you're giving public speeches. The third and final difference between public and conversational speaking is that public speaking requires a different method of delivery. So the method of delivery is a pre-recorded message, or in our cases now, Teams meetings, or before the pandemic, in class, in front of the classroom, in a podium, or on a stage, etc. That's different than when you're talking to your friends. You would never address your friends from a podium. That'd be weird. You would address your friends as equals, right? When you're public speaking, you become temporarily more important than your audience, because your audience should be paying attention to you, right? So, the next password is Cyrus, as in Billy Ray Cyrus, I guess. Now we're going to talk about nervousness. Nervousness can be read more in detail from pages 8 through 15 in your textbook. So just going over the main headlines of nervousness. So the first one is acquiring speaking experience. So what this means is the more times you give a public speech, the more chances you get to talk to a lot of people, to address a lot of people, the less scary and the more prepared you'll feel when you give your next public speech. The next big, bold thing that they talk about is, the title is called Prepare, Prepare, Prepare. Basically, the saying, practice makes perfect, is a lie. You cannot be perfect. No one can be. There is no such thing as perfect. Practice, however, can make prepared and proficient. So my suggestion to all of you is to always practice your speeches enough to where you start to know where the speech is going without having to look down. That does not mean memorize. That just means know your speech. Like, be familiar with your speech. You don't have to memorize it again. You just have to know where it's going, right? So the next kind of big thing to talk about is think positively. If you put out positive energy into the world's gonna reciprocate. It's kind of a law of physics, you know. Things go out, something has to come back, yeah? Usually, you know, of a reaction of an equal force. With positive thinking, another one that goes hand in hand is the power of visualization. So the power of visualization, a lot of people use it. So famous athletes will tell you, like, they'll go up to the free throw line and they'll close their eyes and they're vividly, keyword there, vividly, picturing themselves throwing the free throw and it going into the basket. They're thinking of the sound that it'll make. They're thinking of exactly how many bounces from the backboard onto the rim it'll make before it goes in. They're picturing their exact arm placement. They're picturing their leg placement, etc. These are all things that they're visualizing before they go through with the shot, so that it kind of, like, it's a mental practice, so that when you physically do it, it feels like you've just done it. So it'll hopefully go as you planned it, right? The next one is that know that most nervousness isn't visible. A lot of people get hung up on, they'll hear my stuttering, or they'll hear that my voice is shaking, or they'll see that my hands are shaking. There are little tips to not see those things. Also, people aren't paying attention to those things as closely as one thinks. Unless your papers are going like this, people aren't going to notice that your hands are shaking. Unless you are talking super quietly so no one can hear you, people aren't going to notice. Unless you make a weird, oh crap, I messed up face, they're not going to notice you messed up. The last thing to keep in mind is do not expect perfection. The minute you expect to be perfect is the minute you've set yourself up for failure. Remember to practice to be prepared, not to be perfect. Okay? The last keyword is Mozart, as in, well, password is Mozart, as in the composer from the classical time periods of music. And on to the key terms of this chapter. So the key terms of this chapter are as followed. The first one is stage fright. It can be found on page 8 of your textbook. But stage fright is anxiety over the prospect of giving a speech in front of an audience. This can refer to giving any kind of performance in front of any kind of audience. I am a music major, have been a performer all my life, and I still get stage fright occasionally. It happens to the best of us. It's natural. The second key word is adrenaline. Adrenaline can be found on page 10. Adrenaline is a hormone released into the bloodstream in response to a physical or a mental or emotional stress. So this is the hormone that surges through moms' bodies when they're lifting cars off their babies. Adrenaline can lead to positive nervousness, which is the next key term. Positive nervousness is also found on page 10. Positive nervousness is controlled nervousness that helps energize the speaker for the presentation. If you're going to be nervous, at least try to channel all of that energy into something positive. Because if you channel into something negative, then everything is going to go wrong. Again, positive thinking, putting positive vibes out into the universe, good things will come. But negative vibes out into the universe, negative things will come. Kind of like you'll always find trouble if you go looking for it. The next key term is visualization, which can be found on page 12. Visualization is mental imagining in which speakers vividly picture themselves succeeding, just like a basketball player. The next key term is critical thinking, found on page 16. Critical thinking is focused, organized thinking about such things that are things as logical relationships among ideas, the soundness of evidence, and the difference between fact and opinion. I'll say it again. Focused, organized thinking about such things as the logical relationships among ideas, the soundness of evidence, and the difference between fact and opinion. That is critical thinking. The next few key terms are speaker, found on page 17, message, found on page 18, channel, also on 18, listener, again on 18, frame of reference on 19, feedback, also on 19, interference and situation on page 20. I went over those in chapter 1, part 1 in the video about the speech communication model. And the very last key term is ethnocentrism. This is the belief that your own group or culture is superior to all other groups or cultures. This is something that is happening right now in the world, really. When someone says that my culture is better than yours, people get upset because every culture is equally great. So, that completes chapter 1 review for the midterm. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me a message. The reason I'm including page numbers is so that you can go into your textbook and read further into it. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions, and have a good day or night.